If you grew up in a working class household, you know hard work doesn't always pay off.
Elijah is an artist, DJ, and all-round creative force based in London. With a deep-rooted connection to grime and electronic music, in more recent years, Elijah has become known to many for his Yellow Squares project, where he shares insights into the nature of creative work in the digital age.
So agents don't get you bookings. More people DJing casually is good for music. Why do you release music in a format that you do?
This project has organically grown, inspiring many around the world and leading to Elijah being increasingly in demand as a public speaker. Ahead of his first ever speaking tour of Australia, we talked about his experiences growing up listening to pirate radio and documenting the birth of the grime scene. And why, despite going viral on social media, he's more interested right now in the real world. Elijah's commitment to open dialogue, transparency, and telling it like it is makes him a perfect first guest for this podcast. Why make music? Well, a couple of these that I've done, we've started by just going right back to the start as kind of a way to kind of contextualize like who you are now. So like if we can go right back, and I mean like right back to you as a kid, your earliest memories of music, you know, what do you remember feeling, or the first time that music was having an impact on you? It could be anything, but what do you think of when I say that?
I think of radio. Like radio was a big part for me. Like not actually buying music or anything, just like listening to what was played. Like so, turning on like a really like small toy radio I probably had, and like going up and down the dials and playing around with things, and like it being a playful kind of individual thing at the beginning. Yes, and like singing along to songs. Yeah. I mean, I feel like it feels obvious, but I think it's still worth saying. Having these songs that everyone just sung, like Bob Marley or something. Like, I never felt like I made effort to learn the words of those songs, but they were just songs that were ever present in my life. And then I remember realizing that he wasn't even alive in the time that I was alive, and my mind was blown. Just that this music had like such an impact on me, and he'd passed away before I was even born, which just felt so bizarre. And a lot of other music, some American music like Sam Cooke and Otis Redding and stuff. I was like, what? These people are not alive? This is crazy. And then, you know, in terms of UK music, it was, I guess when I realized like, okay, like pirate radio, this is from really early, like 6, 7 years old. Okay, this is not in the pop format or, you know, song format, like just beats. Like, I was quite early and into, you know, something being different to what was on the radio.
Were you aware of that when you were 6 or 7 and you tuned into pirate radio? Did you have the context even at that age of like, oh, there's this music over here and there's this like monoculture or mainstream or whatever you want to call it. I'm listening to this other thing over here. Like, did you have an awareness of that, or is it something your parents talked to you about? Or
yeah, like I had older people in my family and family friends and stuff. It's like, oh, do you listen to jungle, or do you know what I mean? The awareness of there being this other thing, and I guess when those moments like had pop moments, then you could. So like, there's a song like General Levy, Incredible, which is was a massive jungle song. Like when I was like, I think I was like about 7 when it came out, or 8. So there is like an entry point for the whole country to get into this music, but then I was just exposed to it from really young. So the underground plays out in the UK in a very different way. Like everyone might know what that thing is, but they're not necessarily delving deep. Whereas I've been to other places where they just don't know what that thing is at all, you know? And the underground in the UK was a huge part of, or whatever we would call underground now, was like effectively a different kind of pop. So you would have jungle songs in the charts, or you would have like our house music here, you know, like big commercial house was in the charts the same way that I'm trying to think of like whoever the biggest DJ is now would be in the charts.
And so then if we skip through to you, a teenager, and I assume like you're sharing music with your friends, like what age are you starting to actually have some sort of musical practice of your own, whether it's DJ or, did you ever learn music at school, like at primary school or through to high school? Did you ever learn an instrument, or did you have it in the school environment?
No, we didn't really have like serious music training in school, which probably was like a benefit in the end. Or depends who you ask. But
yeah, hang on, what do you mean? Why is that?
Because I think a lot of people that I have met over the years, they say, oh, I learned the violin and then I got bored of it, and then it made me like not want to do music for a long time, and then they come back to music when they find maybe electronic music or something else. Whereas I never had like a detachment from it. It was like, okay, as a fan, listening to radio, and then I was like, okay, grime what became grime was as I was a young teenager. So when I thought about, getting involved in music, it was like the combination of a new scene that was local to me, and then new internet, like internet being like becoming, so this is 2003. So file sharing and forums and all of this kind of new way of sharing music was developing, where you could speak to people locally. People were recording the pirate radio sets for the first time and distributing them like as they were happening, which was quite new, because before that, literally the year before, you would have to like buy tapes or like exchange tapes with people. But then literally 2003, 2004, 5, it went to just the audio has been recorded digitally and being shared online, and that changes everything in terms of the distribution and people hearing it across the country. And I think
what forums and platforms like specifically were they back in the day?
So
around that time,
there were forums for like record shops. So there was like a forum like called Uptown Records, the Uptown Record Shop, and then a forum for a magazine called Rewind, which was big here. So it was like a free magazine, like kind of like run by advertising, but the website had a forum on it, and people used to speak about grime and dubstep on there. And then there was like Dubstep Forum, and then Grime Forum, and then I guess that the tail end of those things was like Twitter, I guess, and Twitter has become like the final form of it.
Yeah, the final form. Although Reddit kind of has that energy sometimes of the old school message board.
Yeah, Reddit, and then now Discord.
It can be a hard thing to explain to someone who wasn't there in 2003 what the internet felt like. Do you know?
Yeah, it felt big and small at the same time, like a local village of the regular contributors. Like you weren't following anyone, so I guess new people could come in and enter at the same level and post something interesting, or post an article, or post a song. Like one of the most famous grime songs, like instrumentals, was posted on the internet forum, and he was like, this is one of the greatest grime songs of all time, before it even been played by anyone, and it's endured. Like he was obviously just like a young, excited kid at that time, but it did end up being like one of the most. It's like literally a club classic here in the UK, which we could have never known from this, random internet post. I love stuff like that. Like you would never find, say, maybe now the original tweets of like an artist. People just delete them, but the forums, that ones that have actually stayed online, you see these like real, like important bits of music history that have been able to be captured. Literally just young kids sharing their first bits of work, or what bits of work that they're proud of, that they would never like know what happens next with it. Now I guess I've set up the way I communicate online to not be on forums, because I just spent so much time in them in my teens and 20s, and I think post lockdown I was like, okay, I'm going to orientate a project around being outside and talking to people in real life more, just because I'd spent nearly 2 years indoors. So there's components to the work that I do now that it probably would be like interesting to have a Discord or some sort of private group, but I don't want to spend more time with the computer than I already do. So I make effort to get outside and meet people and go to gigs and a lot of like talk events and lectures and other kinds of gatherings, rather than I probably go to like less gigs now, but like a lot of music people gatherings of all kinds, or creative people gatherings and talks and all that kind of stuff. So I feel like I'm having real life versions of chats I used to have on the internet, and even a conversation like this is something that I would have loved to do back in the day. But I guess we weren't Zooming and podcasting and all of these kind of things. Whereas now it's become like the standard way of like communicating with other like enthusiasts.
It has been obvious to me, just keeping an eye on your progress, that you've had this urge to get more and more in the real world, even as the reach of your posts and of your messages is increasing in these online spaces. It's almost like a resistance or a conscious choice of like, actually, I want to make sure I'm in the world. But hold that. Let's go back.
Okay.
So aside from being on forums, so when do you start DJing? And, did you have kind of like a scene with your mates, or do you kind of in high school or soon after fall in with a crew or anything like that? Or how does that kind of play out?
Yeah, at the beginning, I was just like filming pirate radio sets on my like kind of like mini DV camera, and then I made like a music DVD of like the local artists at the time. So like the grime scene, that was like the first kind of creative project I did with a friend. So like edited it with my friend on like one of them Sony programs. I can't remember what it's called, but it was long. It was like, so because you had to like you recording it effectively on a tape, and then you had to like play it through back on the computer and then edit it and then chop it back out and then export it, and then we put it on DVD, distributed it ourselves locally, like sold about 1,000 copies, which is like mind blowing now that happened, and we made a bit of money as well.
Where were you distributing them? Like how?
It was in record shops, and then I always used to just have copies with me in my rucksack, and I'd sell it for any price I could get off people, as long as they would take it off my hands. Pretty much that was around like a year, nearly. I think it was like a year to record and then a year of selling. So that was really good. And then I didn't develop that further, but some of the footage has now like emerged on YouTube, which is cool as well. So I've seen it on like different like grime history channels and stuff. I'm like, oh yeah, I actually filmed that. That was pretty cool. But it was 20 years ago, it was like literally 20 years ago, 2004, 2005. So that's like the first bits of me like producing work. And then I thought there was like this intersection of like DJing and writing that was interesting, which is not, before there was like a journalist and then there was a DJ, and those two people were separate, but I kind of wanted it to be somewhere in the middle. So I started a blog in 2007 and was buying records at the same time. So I was like, okay, a blog from like the DJ's perspective of this thing. I would like do radio shows, and eventually got onto Rinse FM and was like posted the track listing with the download link. And at the time that was like big for like a niche scene, because the DJs of that generation were like, they weren't technophobes in any way. Obviously they're making music on a computer, but they were like less internet based, or like didn't have social media in the same way. But I was like very, they would talk to me about, oh, how do I get onto, how do I build my followers on MySpace or whatever it was, or friends on MySpace, or what I mean, this kind of thing. Whereas I was very internet native, and part of the push and pull of my work at the beginning was like trying to look like a pirate radio DJ, because I was, but then also like look like a blogger, because I was too. But like the push and pull between both. So people are like, well, are you a journalist or are you a DJ? Well, I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. Which is now like, it's obvious, like people are multi-hyphenates, or they mediums have become a lot more fluid, so that's like understandable. But at that time it was, I even felt like I had to like commit and be like, okay, now I'm just going to be DJ, I'm not going to write anymore, and I'm going to start a label. And
like, so you sort of, you're documenting a scene excuse me, you're documenting a scene, or you're documenting music that you love, you're curating music as well, but whether you're filming it or writing about it on your blog, here's a big question, but like, what was it about that music? What was the impact that you were seeing it have that made you feel like, oh, this is going to need to be documented? Aside from just people want to hear about it, so I'm going to like, produce a product, I'm going to make a DVD that people will buy. I've got a feeling that you were motivated by more than that as a fan, and as like someone who's evolved into a person who has a fairly elevated, sense of culture and its role in society. So like, what was it at the time that you were kind of like, I got to document this?
I think it's a combination of things. I think the music I'd listened to it. Grime felt like an amalgamation of all the music I'd listened to growing up. So it felt like reggae, jungle, house and garage, and rap music all combined into one, happening on my doorstep. So I knew there was something special, and I couldn't articulate. I was like, this is special. I don't know what this thing is. And then obviously the pirate radio bit, like old technology, new technology. This is not something I was articulating at the time. You just feel like a moment in, and I was young and figuring out what I wanted to do in my life. It was just a perfect storm of like personal circumstances, where I lived, what I grew up on, identifying with those people and not like necessarily the lyrics, but just the energy of that thing. When I used to watch music documentaries, they would describe the thing that they grew up on in the same way. They'd be like, oh, it was real DIY. It was just kids doing something. And it was like, they were like we just learned how to play the guitar and we started a band, and then this one started a zine. And I was like, we're doing that thing now. And like, whether it was punk or this thing or rap music, I was like, this is our 1988 moment. This is our punk. This is our something. But it didn't even have a name at that point. I just knew that it was special, and I wanted to be close to it in some way. And I did it. There was a point where I went to university and I didn't even think I'd be part of it. I just was just an observer more than anything. And then I hit like another kind of wall in my own journey, finding myself as maybe like in terms of what I wanted to do as a career. And I was like, actually, no, let me go back to this thing. There's something here, even though there was no job or immediate financial gratification. I just knew that there was something exciting. Can
you now, with hindsight, like understand better what it was that drove you back there?
Yeah, I mean, like the literal personal circumstances was there were 2009. I graduated. It was the credit crunch. I was going for jobs and I just couldn't get them. They said, "Oh, you haven't got enough experience." And I'd already done like.
What did you study? What was your course?
It was like business and marketing. It just wasn't something that I was like in love with. But at least I had some sort of framework of like understanding how, or what you think is understanding how to run a business or something like that, or marketing. I was going to do economics originally, but the maths scared me off a bit. Kind of regret that, but.
Really? That's interesting, because I'm like, I'm not an economist or an expert in any way, but I'm finding myself in the last like couple of years thinking, I really feel like maybe I should study economics, or like that we need more people studying economics and specifically like new models of economics and revolutionary economics and stuff. Is that what you're talking about, or not? So much?
Yeah, well, weirdly, when not too long after I finished, I watched this lecture by this guy, and he said, if you spend 10 minutes a year on macroeconomics, you've wasted 9 minutes. and that made me also feel kind of good. I was like, okay, that maybe music is my place to be, So yes, I mean, you could produce as many economists or someone that could market a sandal or something, but there wasn't as many people that could, first generation Jamaican, British, pirate radio enthusiast, internet native, DJ person. Like that was me. So there was no job for that at the time. If there was, I would have ideally. I mean, how many people would have applied? Like 10, maybe. Where the jobs I was going for were like 100 people were applying, and I was 21, and people were in the queue for the interviews, and they were like 35. I was like, what am I doing here? This is ridiculous. So it was really like a junction where I was like, okay, well, I can continue trying to get a job, or I can try and find a way to make this thing work.
Yeah. So I guess then, and thank you, because this is like, I wasn't really sure what this was going to be when talking to you, Elijah, because I'm just really curious about you as a person, and it's turned into like your life story, which I'm very appreciative of. But
That's all good.
So we're up to your 20s then, I guess. Like, so talk us through your 20s. You sort of end up like with a foot in the music industry and a foot doing other things, from what I can tell, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't even call it the music industry. It was literally just, I was on pirate radio, so Rinse FM, and I was like getting music from all different like young producers that were making kind of grime and kind of experimental music, I had a late night show, like 1 till 3 in the morning with my friend Skilliam. And we were like, okay, there's like a little movement of artists or producers and beat makers. Let's like combine that with MCs and put branding behind it. So like the original kind of thesis for the label was like hyperdub, but for grime.
Yeah.
So it's like this kind of label of, I guess, misfits, but with a kind of London kind of street music approach. So that kind of, again, that the duality of like being like internet native, but then also quite, close to like a street culture that maybe dubstep or like other kind of experimental electronic music didn't have. So I always felt like I sat between electronic music and rap, or electronic music and grime. And that being, I guess this whole conversation might be about the dualities, or living in two worlds at the same time, or my work and me living in two worlds at the same time. And that being maybe sometimes why some of my work has resonated, because it's speaking to both at this,
Yeah. Well, let's dig in. Like, what are those two worlds then? Like, could you like articulate that?
Yeah. So grime effectively is like was like the UK rap of its day. So I guess the way it would be promoted here would be on like black music radio, and be separate from like electronic music culture, which was say like on Radio 1, played by Pete Tong, and maybe like a late night show with dance music and a very different kind of DJ led presentation, whereas grime had like MC led presentation. So like the most famous artists from that scene were like that Dizzy Rascal and Skepta. So they're like rappers. Mm-hmm. They also make beats as well, which I think is like super important in the story of the music compared to like US rap. Most of the rappers don't make beats. And they were also DJs as well, people that played records and had radio shows. And then whereas electronic music is DJ focused, I guess the rooting of it for a lot of people comes from like house and techno. Is like the base, the bedrock of that thing. Points more European for a lot of people here, whereas our anchor is more, at that time at least, was more the Atlantic. So it'll be like Jamaica, reggae, dub, dancehall, rap music, that corner. And then you could say other things that have influenced it, maybe like Miami bass or techno or garage, of course, like that have swerved with it. But I think a lot of like European or UK dance music or UK electronic music has probably been more influenced by Berlin and Belgium and New York for obvious reasons and Chicago for obvious reasons. But the I guess where people point is just very different. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. It's funny, like, I think maybe it's true that it's often the people that are sort of torn between two worlds, or existing, or not even torn, but just sort of like existing natively across different roles or across different worlds, are often the ones that have the good insight on all of it, because they've got multiple perspectives to draw on. They've got like a bit more of a three-dimensional or multi-dimensional perspective on how everything works. But it's funny when you said like, oh, I think it's that I'm in between two worlds is why I'm here and why people are resonating with what I'm saying. I didn't realize you meant like between grime and electronic music. I thought it was more like philosophical or something that you said.
Oh yeah, like that too. I mean, like my
mindset and that mindset,
That too. I mean, like my dad always lived in Jamaica, and my mum lives in the UK. So I've always had like, okay, I'm Jamaican living in London. That kind of tension, or okay, I'm an artist, but also understand business. And usually that was far apart. I'm like, well, yeah, I think there's many ways I could frame different parts of like my ideas. I do a lot of like long form, and then I do a lot of short form, but nothing really in the middle. I think the middle ground, most of the time, middle ground thing is like a waste of time for most people. It's like kind of really hard on one bit and then really hard on the other extreme,
Yeah. Or somehow like bouncing between those extremes, or sort of like smashing them together, not necessarily finding the weird, like, well, you mix all of the colors in the rainbow together and it's just bright, like grey brown, right? Like it's about having all of those different perspectives as discrete things and having to somehow find harmony in them or just appreciate the messiness of them. But I'm going into woo woo land, Elijah. So you can stop me whenever you want there. But so let's skip to it. Like the moment, I guess, where I become aware of you, and many people do outside of your established scenes and your established networks home, is during the pandemic, right? Like around lockdown era, you do like a reset of your social media. You're already kind of pretty well known for your spicy tweets, like for hot takes and stuff, right? But there's something about the yellow square tiles that you start posting with these like koan type, sometimes calls to action or sometimes just observations or insights. And a few of those start to pick up and go viral. And can you tell me how that all felt as it was happening, or like how that played out in your mind?
Yeah, so I'll just preface it by saying, I spent like about 9 months offline after like the conversations around race in June 2020, which I thought, I don't know, I just didn't want to be part of. I thought like the pandemic was hard enough on personally, professionally. And then it was like another thing. I thought, you know what, let me just have a break from this. I'd been online constantly for maybe 20 years at that point, every day, nearly. I thought it would be nice to have a break. Then I actually deleted my accounts. And then when I tried to turn them back on, I had to start them from scratch. So I kind of just laughed. I was like, oh, I've like lost all the followers I've had, like built up over this last decade. Great. What do you do when you have 0 followers? Like, I think you have to like post something interesting or useful to other people. So it was more like refining maybe thoughts that I had while I was offline, in lockdown, and what the scenes and the music community would be like post everything opening up. So the first squares are literally the week after we played our first show. I wasn't even going to sure where I was going to land out of it. So I thought, let me just share a lot of things that I learned through this journey and what I've been thinking about, and see if it's useful to other people. The actual formatting of it, the yellow square, was just my branding for the label has been black and yellow. And someone said, oh, we should put the tweets on Instagram. So I was like, okay, I could make it just align with the label branding. So, and then after, so people were like, oh, is this a post-it note? I was like, oh yeah, like it was this secondary thought. So it was just to make it look good on Instagram. And I did a few iterations before I got to the one that you see now. So I deleted the first like wave of posts. They looked a bit scrappy. And once I learned how to use the app, which is Procreate, again, which is free, I was like, okay, I found the like way of doing this that looks as good as I can get it without becoming a graphic designer.
I remember, one of the messages that was coming up a lot when you were posting, when I first discovered you, was just this idea of just do it, just go make the thing, right? Like actually, this idea, I think a lot of artists are sort of doom scrolling like the rest of us, and they're trapped for some reason, which is not necessarily strictly a 21st century phenomenon. Artists often have trouble with confidence, or they have a perfectionist streak, or they are confused about where to start, or they feel like they've got to wait for a door to open for them, or often they just don't have access to the avenues that they think are the things that they need in order to move forward. So is that something that you've kind of felt for a long time, this kind of telling artists just to make sure they're just getting out there and doing it?
Yeah, I mean, the message was for me as well, is close the act, make the thing. It's me. It's right. I was replying to someone on like a Sunday afternoon, and they're asking me some sort of like intricate question about creativity, and that was my response: close that, make the thing. And because I don't know the answer to these things, the only thing I can really say is, well, let's just try, experiment. I've lost, thousands of hours in these apps and thinking and taking in all this information that I didn't need to. Make the thing is, for me, that might be useful to other people. And now make the thing, whatever, is like part of this project has me making things with this this architecture, this like design system, and then sharing the like read results or the feedback and all of this kind of stuff. So it's not just the prompts or the ideas. It's like the outcomes of those ideas. So okay, why don't I write a song, or why don't I do a visual installation? Why don't you put this on a billboard? Or why? You know what I mean? Like it needs to have that other layer. Otherwise, all of this is it's meaningless. Like you're witnessing me try out all these things in real time. It's like a proof of concept. There's just low cost as well. So I'm not using like leverage of like money, or, you know, I rarely do brand collaborations or anything that is, you know, that intricate. It's ideas, iPad, a laptop, and experiments. That's it. You know, collectively across the whole project, I probably spent, you know, maybe like £2,000 in 3 years. So this is something that people, so you could call that about £700 a year. It's something that people could do on a part-time job.
A lot of the comments, you know, when people are engaging with you, the different things you're saying, and you say all sorts of different stuff, right? But a lot of the comments for me, like I read in them a sense of relief, or a sense of like being seen. Like there's this phrase like saying the quiet part out loud, right? I feel like a lot of what you're doing, and I see other people doing this as well on social media, particularly around music, and, you know, the music industry traditionally can have pretty low transparency in terms of how does that all actually work. And when someone actually kind of takes a moment to sort of go, well, I've been doing this for a bit, and just here's my take, it kind of works like this. There's always a wave of people, I feel like I've experienced this, that are like sliding into DMs just to say, oh my God, like, thank you, you know, thanks for saying this. I mean, is that something that you experience, and does that motivate you to keep going?
Yeah, there's sometimes when I'm saying things that I just feel obvious to me. They're not like I'm trying to be contrarian. I'm just like, well, isn't this more true than it's not? Isn't this true for 99% of people? This is not something that I would say to Prince, but we're not Prince. So let's use that as a framework. Like, yeah, I wouldn't say close that and make the thing to Prince. He did that. Yeah, I'm sure he was sitting there doom scrolling, or I guess they didn't have that thing at the time. But maybe I think the layer that has been super important is me not trying to sell anyone anything. And I think you talk differently when you're trying to sell a course, or you're trying to sell a supplement, or you're trying to sell like some other bigger idea, like, oh, come and learn how to DJ at my school, or come and do a course on creativity, or come and join the Discord. It's like, no, the ideas standing alone by themselves without any further call to action tells a different kind of truth, I guess. I think having, again, that opposite take, you know, there's too many DJs. I'm like, no, there aren't enough DJs. How about that? And exploring a different mechanism of thinking about that thing, that is interesting to me. To me that's like creativity. That's like thinking about things, rather than maybe what I saw in 2020 was everyone land on the same point, or everyone's like, okay, well, we synthesized this into Black Lives Matter, that's it, end of conversation. I'm like, we can probably expand this further and it be more generative, and like people ask more questions, and it not be so matter of fact. And that'd be interesting and challenging, and like, you know, there's going to be tears. There's going to be like moments of like not understanding, or things that are going to be hard. But that's what makes it interesting. And then when it didn't feel like, it's particularly with that thing, I'm like, oh, if that's what art becomes, everyone just centering on slogans and like very limited, I guess, iterations of like ideas that have been shared globally, especially like with a global issue. I'm like, I don't want to be part of that. So let me make my project different to that, you know? And other people,
and not just you're different, but
other people do the same thing, you know?
Yeah.
And like disagreement being a good thing.
I remember once hearing about this idea of being a human signpost. I remember hearing that described once in in an interview where it's like, you know, one way to chart a different course of action is to just do it and just be like, I'm over here doing it this other way, everyone. And, you know, and that will just signal to some other people that maybe that's a useful thing. But it also made me think about, you know, when you're talking about feeling frustrated that everyone's choosing to have the same way of working or the same response to something, or sort of a copy-paste response to a political issue or whatever it might be. Like, I think one of your, I'm not going to be able to remember off the top of my head, but one of your tiles is about the music ecosystem, that you can't have a thriving music ecosystem if everyone's doing the same thing, which kind of ties in with ideas of literally the ecosystems and the biosphere and biodiversity. I mean, we can't have a thriving planet unless we have all of these different kind of complex, interesting, weird, diverse systems all bumping up against each other to create this kind of colourful web of life. And, you know, we talk about the music ecosystem. If we want a thriving ecosystem, everyone's got to be out there experimenting and figuring out new things. And it can be really hard, I think, for artists who see the music industry independent of that ecosystem, and they kind of just, there's narratives told, you know, for so many years over time, and they shift and change, but a lot of the core bits stay the same about what it means to be an artist and what your music is actually for in the world. It can be hard to even imagine doing something different, you know, like even just planting the seed with someone like, hey, it's good if you're doing something different, can be a revelatory moment for a lot of artists.
Exactly. And now, especially because we're on these same platforms, like I cannot change the Instagram being a square, or I cannot, like if you're on Spotify, it's going to present it in the same way as every record ever released. I say to people, like, why do you can not put it on there if you don't want to? And they're like, what? But then how? I'm like, yeah, like all of the challenges that will come with you not putting it on there would make something interesting in itself. Like, and yeah, just knowing that there are no rules. And I guess we're speaking about this industry. It's like, I'm not widely participating in the industry. I'm not employed by anyone. These are just ideas that have been kind of accumulating over a longer period of time. And I'm not of the like mindset that, oh, if you do it this way, it will work, because that is not true. And it's not true more than it's true. So if it's like, oh, well, you post your content at 6 p.m. and, you know, post every day about what you're doing and your creative process, it's like, this does not work. You know, there's more randomness in it than people would like to make out. And I guess Instagram and maybe podcasting and tweets have created a business of post-rationalization that, again, I am participating in to some degree, but also recognizing that I'm participating in post-rationalization. And without that acknowledgement, sometimes people go, well, this is the formula for a sustainable music career. I'm like, a sustainable music career has never existed in the history of the recorded music business. This is not true. I read a stat, it was like 50% of the chart since its inception has been people that entered it once. The top 40. So that tells you 50% of the chart at any time have been one-hit wonders in a year. So there is no sustainability. They went back down to zero. They contributed something that people liked one time, which is so difficult to do, and then they had to find something else to do, or their life changed in some way. And I think the democratization of production and music making and sharing and the distribution has made people think that this is like a normal career. This is like being an accountant or a dentist, and it's not. And approaching it like that, some people will find success in approaching this thing like a dentist, for sure. But again, the 99% will not. And I think it's more interesting if we throw out that idea completely. Like, let's just not even try and make this thing sustainable. Let's do something. Let's just shape this thing in a completely different mechanism. And yeah, we're still going to have anomalies, but we might have a completely different creative landscape if people are able to work on something else 3 days a week, if a nurse is able to be a DJ, if the chef is like more contributing to the music in the restaurant. Like, what happens when the bar staff are the DJs of the bar? Like, do you know what I mean, having a bit more close contact with music and creativity from people that are actually working in the space and beyond it, you know? I think that's like probably where things are going next, especially if people want to be able to pay their rent and, you know, live some sort of comfortable existence. If you don't, then it's a different thing. But for the 99%, that's probably like most useful.
It feels to me like a potentially really healthy reimagining of music, if music is just a thing that everybody who has a job and they have their lives, that they then express into their music or as a DJ or in whatever part of their practice. You know, that feels like that would generate a lot of music and a lot of communities and a lot of musical practice that is very human and very real and very connected to place and to real things and real stuff going. Like that actually, like, that sounds amazing to me. But the flip side is I'm curious whether you found this, like, you know, I've sometimes talked in different settings, like on panels at music conferences or talking to industry folk or even like, you know, talking to other artists or union reps and sometimes like when I have kind of posited this theory of like, I'm not sure that campaigning for like every musician to have like some sort of full-time career is a sustainable thing or even a thing. Like, I don't know if that's possible or even that's something that's good. And I've been criticized a couple of times as like, so hang on, do you mean musicians shouldn't get paid? You know, like there's such a struggle to like get Spotify to up their rates, to get like minimum payments at gigs, you know, and it's just, to me, it just feels like the wrong conversation, you know?
Yeah, what you're saying happens a lot is like people have 10 conversations on top of each other. And yeah, like you making this point is like, doesn't mean that Spotify shouldn't work better.
Yeah.
And what you said about like, you know, people making music and sharing as part of a healthy life is what people have done for thousands of years. Like that's
it.
Like, and the hard bit, what for people to understand maybe today is that we're the first generation that have done it by themselves. Before, if you wanted to drum and sing and play a string instrument at the same time, it was not possible. And we didn't do it. We did it collectively. It was Bob Marley and the Wailers. It was Prince and the Revolution. You know, there was more hands, even with leaders and with all these things. There weren't just one person sitting in a room crafting things by themselves. Those are rare exceptions. Most of the time, as this thing has been highly collaborative, highly community driven. You know what I mean? These are not islands in themselves. These are people that were in something and part of something. And yes, like the easy comparison that I've been making a lot in terms of music and music being part of people's lives, or creativity broadly being part of people's lives, is when I was growing up, the gym wasn't everywhere. Gyms weren't everywhere we have them everywhere here in the UK. And that has changed the lifestyles of people. Like there were pubs on every corner, but not gyms on every corner. Now we have gyms on every corner. There are less people in pubs, and people, the death of the pub. Yeah, that's caused other social changes, but then maybe people are healthier. People are exploring, you know, running clubs and swimming clubs and walking and all these other kind of things to get their body moving in a way the generation previously didn't do it. What is maybe interesting, like maybe what you're suggesting is like, if that happens, but for creativity and for music and for art, what happens when a bunch of healthy people, not tied to alcohol, are also creating things without the expectation that you're going to be Damien Hirst or Drake? You know? Mm-hmm. I think that more people would be happy and live happier lives, eating good, exercising good, creating stuff, having some sort of stable income. On occasion, some whatever virality happens or some random moment of attention because you've made something exceptional or connected with a lot of people. That's one of the possibilities if you're creating stuff, but it shouldn't be an expectation. And I think the less this becomes an expectation, the more true and ability for people to tell truth becomes, you know? Whereas if you're trying to do something that works for the algorithm, again, you all land on the same point, you know? And I've seen this where you'll have artists all across the world trying to, you know, as soon as the new song comes out, all trying to bootleg the same song. And, you know what I mean? You literally land on the same ideas. And I'm not sure, like, if that makes, I guess, creativity or the music ecosystem better, like, or more interesting or healthier, you know? When I think of, like, creativity and music and art, I think of this as something being a net positive for people's mental health. But the way it's been approached it's becoming a net negative for most people.
When you talk about like gyms versus pubs, or not even versus, but you know, like when you're talking about that, something that has come up a bit in conversations I've had over the years is, you know, Australia, we're a proud sporting country. Like we've just had a mad Olympics who won like 100 gold medals or whatever. And, you know, it's a stereotype of Australians. We're a sporty people. We have sporting clubs like at a local level, and they are subsidised by state government and local council. And they are I'm not a policy expert on public health and sport, but from my understanding, a lot of the reasoning behind funding these sporting clubs, like cricket clubs and footy clubs and whatever it might be, it's not necessarily about breeding the next Olympian or the next superstar footballer or basketballer or whatever it might be. I mean, there's a separate division that's doing that and is funding that. But really what it's about public health, because there's an awareness and there's research, decades of research showing that if you put into the communities a subsidised, accessible physical activity, you will have great physical outcomes. People will be healthier. So they are from an economic perspective, they're not taxing the health system as much. That's a win. It's cheaper in that perspective, but also mental health outcomes, community outcomes, people gluing together as part of a team or as part of a club, the secretary and the treasurer, the people running the canteen, all of this, right? And it is, you know, sport's not for everyone, but for many Australians, that is part of their lives as adults, is that they maintain some sort of sporting activity, not because they think they're going to be able to reach the NBA one day, but because they want to play basketball because it makes them feel good, right? So music doesn't have that. Like we don't have that in music. Like there are community choirs and there's like pub choirs and there are music community groups, but not really like an organised, funded, subsidised practice that is explicitly like, hey, we're actually doing this as public health policy. That's something that's always been really interesting to me. Like, what would that look like? What would those clubs, like your local music club, look like? It's not necessarily, as you say, the bar that's selling drinks. The only reason they're putting the gig on is so they can sell the drinks because that's how everyone gets paid, and not necessarily the most healthy way. And increasingly, people don't actually want that. Like you've got a generation coming through that aren't really drinking. They don't actually want to go even to the pub. Like it's just not a thing that they're doing as much, you know, which is just, yeah. We're having we're having a fair amount of trouble in Australia with live music at the moment, which you'll probably hear all about when you're here shortly in a few weeks. You know, big music festivals falling over, taking a year off, quitting entirely, music venues in crisis. Tickets have not really rebounded from post-COVID, and everyone's just sort of running around like crazy. It just feels like there's an opportunity there to reimagine what music even is at the community level, you know?
Definitely, like I agree. And again, I think this serves more people than it doesn't. Like, you know, I feel like this serves the 99%. Like everyone loves music. So like who would not want to be involved in a circumstance like that, and taking music back out of say like the festival space. I think festivals are good for all the reasons that we already know, but what happens when you maybe even overlapping the two things, so like music and sport, or music and whatever art, or like just more convergence. Sometimes, like, because the sport people only talk to the sport people, and then the music people only talk to the music people, and the tech people only talk to the tech people, that becomes like another like set of challenges too. And maybe me working in multiple mediums has helped me bring people with really good ideas together. that would never have spoken otherwise. Like at first I was incubated into a tiny music scene. So if you weren't interested in grime, you wouldn't know who I was. Then it was like, okay, being in electronic music as well, I was meeting people from that do house and techno and drum and bass. Cool. That's slightly wider, but you still had to be interested in clubs, electronic music. Then, okay, if you get into like being published as a journalist, okay, cool. You're kind of in the media landscape a bit. If someone finds your work these days on outside of these crazy algorithms. But what does it look like when, like you said, the funded sports people now have to maybe say use 5% of their budget for people moving their body with music? And what is that music? Like, what would that music be in Australia? Because it would be very different to what it'd be in the UK. We have drum and bass boxing here. So DJ, like a DJ in the class with an MC doing a boxing class. Like, I'm like, this is brilliant. This is so good. So when I went to do an event last year, and it was like the event before my event in a church hall, and I was like, this. And, you know, the DJ was like an established drum and bass DJ, is like a legend of that scene. And I think this is so much healthier than telling people to come out at 2 a.m. to see him. This guy's like, was in his 50s, like finding another mechanism to play records and like everyone sweat out and enjoy it and have a different context to why that music was designed in the first place. But then if the music now was being designed for that space, yeah, there's going to be some things that are like the most obvious worst music of all time. Yeah, sure. But if that had to be local music, how interesting would that be? Like, if you're, you know, do you have the same thing here where you play like Freed from Desire in the stadiums? You know,
I don't think
na,
so.
na, 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 na. Like, we have this song, like this in Italian.
I'm not in
like,
the
dance music
stadiums
song.
much, unfortunately. But
Okay. So something as simple as that, right? So if there was some sort of random mandate, you're like, the music that gets played on the goals or the points scored or halftime at every stadium in Australia has to be Australian. Like, all of these things where you can just, again, meet people where they are and make a bit of space. Again, the tech people or the sport people make a bit of space for music or make a bit of space for art. But yeah, here in London, like the running club thing has become quite fashionable, and nature walks. I've seen a whole bunch of people that I'm like, you're not going bird watching. What's going on here? But people that you would have gone to clubs before, gigs, they're now going bird watching. Like, okay,
yeah,
or roller skating or whatever it's going to be. It's a completely different thing. I'm like, okay, where's the music or the creativity that meets those people where they are? That's super interesting.
Well, you're going to be in Australia soon. I think you're starting off because you're doing a few talks and you're kicking off at Big Sound, which is sort of Australia's music conference. And I imagine that you've gone to a few of those, maybe over the years in your various roles. But I'm just going to take a stab that in the last few years, as you know, the messages you've been putting up on socials have travelled far and wide. You've been invited to a lot of these music industry conferences. Like, you may not be able to answer this question, but what do you make of them? Like, what's your relationship with those events?
I think most of them should program a lot less things, and what they program should be better prepared and highly just highly thought through. So less panels, less people, less information, and just higher quality stuff throughout. And then just a lot of time for people to actually talk to each other, and that be the basis of why you're gathering, not to just listen to what someone thinks about streaming or what someone from a tech company thinks artists should do to grow their following on social media. It's like, this is a waste of time. And what I guess people in the industry don't often recognize is that they are employed people telling unemployed people what to do, and they have a very different risk association with this thing than an artist, like a DIY band, you know. This is not the same. And that inability to recognize like how different your worlds are and worldview is, even though you're in the same like industry, the circumstances that you're in are completely different. And I rarely see people recognize this. And without it, I think, it's like it's like a waste of time.
Yeah, I feel you on all that. I think there can be a blind spot for people who work in the industry that maybe they're just at arm's length from the artists, or they're not in contact with artists, or they haven't been artists themselves, or they might have the best of intentions, but they still don't quite fully comprehend that they're getting paid and the artists generally aren't, and that's not their fault. It's not their specific fault. It's like they've ended up in a job. They've got a job at some company as part of the music industry, and they're living their best life, and it's great. And the work they're doing is helping artists, and that's what kind of helps them do it. But yeah, it's funny. I've seen that blind spot in many conversations over the years. It's frustrating. You just kind of want to. Sometimes, I did work at a radio station for a long time, and even there, sometimes I felt like I just wanted to make sure there was an artist in every meeting, like in every room. Just like, everything we're doing here is for the artists, or at least it relies on them. If it's for the audience, potentially it relies on the artists. You can have the best of intentions about what is right for them, but unless you ask them, you may not quite have it right. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly. And just that the question, is it still true at scale? So whatever anecdote you're using, how many times could you prove that point? Like, okay, think of not using an anomaly to make your point, and then is it still true? So saying, well, Billie Eilish did this, so you can too. It's like, I'm not sure how helpful that is to anyone, Or even, when I reflect on my own work, yes, there's a lot of like fortunate personal circumstances. There's like location, timing, now I guess tenure and my interests, and maybe like there's some facets of my personality that lend itself well to being on the internet and talking to people. Fine, I accept that. But I try to make my ideas broad enough that people can find something that they can find useful, that they can dial up, that I'm not maybe good at. You know what I mean? And I've taken a lot of time to think about that, especially after hearing, hundreds of hours of other people talk and myself talk now.
Well, I should let you go. I've already kept you a bit too long, but I feel like I could keep talking to you for ages.
It's all good, man. Thank you.
Deep chat. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I hope you enjoy your time in Australia. I mean, I hope you get a day off or something to actually just sort of settle in and enjoy get out amongst the nature, or see the birds.
Yeah.
You mentioned the nature walks and the bird watching. Like, if you want to start that hobby, this is a good country to start in.
I won't have a lot of time, but I think I'm just fortunate to come in the first place, right? So I'm sure I think I'll have a day off in Brisbane, so I'll probably just need it for sleep, and then it'll be like highly intensive like conversations and ideas and sharing and stuff. So and I announced the book on the day that I start the tour. So it'd be like the book is just like a collection of the yellow squares from the past 3 years, which will come out in December. So I'm excited to get that out in the world.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to chat to you again for a part 2 at some point in the future.
Sure.
But yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for doing this, man.
Thank you for taking the time.